How's it going, everyone? This is the Tugboat Settle for More show. Today, we're going to be joined by my friend and colleague, David Princeton. He's one of the foremost experts that I know in the claims field. So, David, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Cameron and Aaron. Pleasure to see you guys. My name is David Princeton. I'm a principal consultant for Advocate Claims Service. We do claims all over the country. We have a good mix of experience in both commercial and residential. Got a whole bunch of designations behind my name, 20 years in the insurance industry, and bring a lot of knowledge and insight to every loss that we get involved in.
All right. So, the theme of the channel is Settle for More. There's an emphasis on helping individuals think about self-advocacy, negotiation, and learning from experts, leaning on experts when they can, where to find good information. So that's why you're here. You're the person that I am often calling when I have a question that I'm stumped on a claim that I have, or just want to bounce an idea off of and see, where do you think this might go? And I found a lot of value from that. So I'm sure that anyone listening to this or watching this will as well. So my first question, what are the most common mistakes property owners make before reaching out to an advocate?
So that's a great question, Cameron. So a lot of the mistakes that get made happen when the policy is actually purchased before a claim even happens. The race to the bottom in the pricing world has really caused people to try to think of insurance as a commodity, meaning if I bought policy A versus policy B and one's a better price, that I'm basically buying the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're really not. In my experience, I've actually seen better coverage. So coverage that's broader and provides more back to a policyholder in the time of loss costs less than something that's much more restrictive, just in a straight premium level capacity. There's so much that goes into filing an insurance rate and everything else, way beyond the scope of this episode or this question. But what you really have to do is you really have to get a good understanding of the base promise that's being made. And the easiest differentiator for a policyholder is to ask the insurance agent what endorsements are available to enhance the coverage form. So, for example, if sewer backup is kind of a common one, right? So if you had a base form that covered sewer backup and you had one that didn't cover sewer backup, and you ask the agent the question of what endorsements are available, the one that needs to offer you an endorsement for sewer backup will hopefully make that offer.
Yeah.
Right. They'll explain sewer backup endorsement, a machinery breakdown endorsement, buried lines and cables, all the different things that enhance the base coverage form. So that's one good differentiator. The other thing that it gives you an indication of where is your probability of loss, right?
Yeah.
So when you think of a base coverage form, they're basically thinking a tornado is going to wipe your house out. A fire is going to take your whole home away. That's what mainly people protect against. Well, the probability of that is very low, right? When you think of your likelihood or your most probable losses, it could be a smaller fire, it could be some type of water damage claim, or some type of sewer backup. And that's where you'll see those things priced a lot more. I always like to use my own home as an example. I live in a rural community. A sewer backup endorsement on my property is about $350 a year. My base premium coverage for my entire home is $900. So it gives you an idea of how much the probability of having a sewer backup in my area is. It's much greater than my entire house disappearing. So that's step one is you got to have the right coverage in place before your loss even happens. It'll make a lot of things easier.
A quick note I have on that, and let me know if you feel the same way, is I've often told people, even if you look at two policies and they seem almost the same, and functionally they are, we know as advocates and people that work with claims that same policy bought from the more affordable insurance company is likely going to be treated a lot differently, right? In our experience of working with one insurance company to another, and how claims are handled from one. I know how automated is your process. What does an adjuster mean for them, right? Is it someone that's actually licensed and all that, and things that you can't really know as a homeowner? But I'll tell people often, that same endorsement is going to be treated differently based on the quality of these two companies, and the price may be an indicator of that, maybe may not.
I don't know how much really drills the quality of the service into the price aspect, but there are certainly companies out there that treat policyholders better than others, regardless of, call it, that underlying promise. The the main thing is, and this is the thing I always try to come into every claim with, which is like people don't call me when things go
Mm-hmm.
right. Right? So I am the aggregate of my experience. So I get brought in when situations are not going well, that the policyholder is not necessarily getting the benefit of their bargain, and whether that's from the very beginning of a claim or later in the middle. As far as like advocating, it's a lot easier to be involved to just have it go right the first
Mm-hmm.
time than it is to have to fix it,
Yeah.
right? So one back to your question of, what is it that policyholders could do better? It's understanding that when you're having that initial conversation with the adjuster or the first notice intake department, they're asking you questions and you're not going to know why you're being asked these questions. But a majority of the time you're being asked questions is because the answers you give lend themselves towards an exclusion. It's not that they lend themselves towards coverage. So as an adjuster at an insurance company, back earlier in my career, you would ask the questions that got you to finding coverage or excluding
Mm-hmm.
coverage, right? So take a water leak, for example. Oh, has this water leak been going on for a long period of
Mm-hmm.
time? Right? And so the policyholder might say, oh yeah, it's been going on forever, because they think I'm asking a question that lends towards coverage. Oh, well, how long has it been going on? Oh, for weeks and
Mm-hmm.
days, da 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 da. Because they think the longer it goes, the more
Yeah.
coverage they would have. Because they're just looking at a totally destroyed, living
Mm-hmm.
room or something. And what policyholders don't understand in those situations is, depending on how they're answering things, like evidence then has to come back in to outplay that, right? So one of the things I always like to do is get my hands on a water bill, right? Especially if your water's
Mm-hmm.
metered. For example, I again live in a rural community. We're actually on a well,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't have a water meter, right? So it'd be difficult in my home to say how long water's been
Yeah.
running, right? Because I don't have a water meter. But in other losses where it's a municipal water supply and your utilization is measured, it's become invaluable, right? To be able to show, well, wait a minute, here's the
Mm-hmm.
day that it spiked up. It wasn't going on for weeks. Here's the moment of failure,
Yeah.
right? And so I think the warning for policyholders would be to understand that when you go into those questions aren't looking for affirmations towards coverage in most
Yeah.
situations. And you're better off saying, I don't know, and trying to get an investigation to happen. Let someone else come in and have the opinion, right? Don't be a causation expert. What caused this loss? Water?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Okay. Where'd the water come from? Ooh, you got
Mm-hmm.
me, right? Because ultimately, when you start thinking of all the different things that come into a water loss, right? Did a plumber not tighten a nut correctly, right? When they installed your
Yeah.
faucet a year and a half ago, right? Or was it a product
Yeah.
defect, right? Was it a failure of a washer? Did they use heat incorrectly? Was there too
Mm-hmm.
much torque applied?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What we can confidently say is that a potable water supply broke,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because water escaped its confines. Beyond that, I don't know that I would go into much more absent somebody else helping figure that out.
And the most accurate answer most often is I don't know. And people are essentially guessing anytime that they're saying something, right? Because the water usually came from in a wall, in a machine, under a sink, and to your point, they're saying things that they're hoping are going to open up more coverage when really they're walking into an exclusion. So it reminds me of one we were helping somebody review recently that their plumber put in the report the word constantly. And so there was a burst supply line and it was leaking constantly. And so what does constantly mean? It is a vague term, but the insurance company took it in the most negative way that they could interpret that. You might hear constantly and think, oh, that means that it was going on, just for a long, long time, long period. And so it was this very, like I said, negative interpretation of that word to the detriment of the policyholder, when what the plumber meant and admitted that he meant was, no, it burst. And then from the time that it burst, it was leaking. No, it wasn't on and off whenever they turned the faucet on. It was constantly leaking once the burst occurred, yesterday.
And that's one thing that I think would be really interesting to do is sit down 100 plumbers and explain to them what their notes mean, right? They all think they're trying to help, right? Like with whatever the situation is. Really like their ability to help doesn't necessarily exist until somebody's read the policy.
Yeah,
Right. So when you say, that use of the word constantly and the way that it can be interpreted, that's the definition of an ambiguity, right?
absolutely.
When two well-reasoned people can look at something and come up with different meanings behind what this word means. And, I think that's another thing homeowners need to be aware of is like, take a homeowner as like this reasonable person. They're not 20 years an insurance professional. They're not, all of these other things. They're just the classic average Joe. When they sit down and read an insurance policy, that is the most honest answer you're going to get about what this policy should or shouldn't do. What do these words mean?
Yep.
And that's the reasonable person standard that courts and others are supposed to look at these things and try to apply, right? Well, what would this mean? And insurance contracts are what are called contracts of adhesion, right? You can't sit down with an insurance company or their agent and try to negotiate the terms, right? I don't like this word. Let's pick a different
You should
word,
always
right?
pull someone in off the street for the conversation. That's a good tactic. Like anytime we're going to sit with an adjuster, just go pull someone out. I need to pay you $10 just to sit in here. Tell us when we're being stupid.
Yeah, just give it a read, right? And so like that wording, that ambiguity part, right? So I already used one, right? Long period of time. But what the heck does that mean? How many water damage exclusions and other things have you read that talk about long period of time? Contextually, a long period of time could be 5 seconds, right?
Yep.
How many sporting events have you seen with 5 seconds on the clock and it takes a half hour to get through it?
Yeah.
Right? So what's a long period of time? So the context of that matters a lot. But it's that ambiguity that insurance companies can somewhat hide behind, right? Because as long as they have a reasonable basis, a lot of your good faith, bad faith kind of disappears, right? For them, a long period of time could, like, it used to be clearer before a lot of changes happened. It used to say for weeks, months, or years. So we at least had the 2-week argument, right?
Yeah.
14 days, right? So we at least had that argument to go by. Well, now long period of time has been, I've seen it applied for minutes by insurance companies.
Yeah. It's like they're just adding more ambiguous words to that list. I looked at a newer policy recently and there's this 15 ambiguous word, right? Gradually, long period of time. Oh, and then what State Farm's new one is if the leak has been occurring over a period of time is literally what theirs says. Like, so if the leak has been occurring for a period of time and we asked the person like, what is that? And they're like, well, it's not defined in the policy. Like, but how are you defining it right now? Like you're interpreting it. So what are you defining it as? Well, I can't say that because it's not in the policy. Somebody's got to say it. Like somebody's gonna have to interpret this at some point. You're denying the claim.
You don't know, or you don't have an expectation of what the promise is until it's either fulfilled or denied. And so when you talk about a period of time and wording that's that broad, the discretion that's either existing at the adjuster level, their management level, a branch manager's level, wherever that decision is being made, the thing to understand about that is like who you're talking to may not have that discretion, but it's their fingers that are going to put the notes into the file that somebody else is going to read and make a decision about, right? And so on and so on. So you guys ever play the game telephone when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Right? You whisper one thing in one person's ear, it goes around, and all of a sudden you find out what it is at the end, and it's completely changed. Insurance is a big game of telephone. So you can impress upon an adjuster anything you want. They're going to hear what they hear. They're going to write what they write. The manager's going to read what they read and write what they write, and so on and so forth. In claims where you end up actually getting the case file, right, where you get the adjuster's notes and other things in litigated matters through disclosure or discovery. When you end up with those things, it's almost amazing because you look at the piece of paper that started it, right? So a letter from a policyholder, a letter from an adjuster, or a letter from a public
Mhm.
adjuster. You look at that first thing and what it says, and then how it was interpreted and applied, and how it just moved so far away from what those initial words were,
Mhm.
right? Those are the things that make for good cases, quite honestly, is, how people saw in it what they wanted to see in it.
I don't always tell a homeowner at the beginning of their claim that they need to read their policy because it's a big ask, right? For most, it's just so overwhelming. But if your claim has been denied, then that becomes like the necessary first step, right? Because we talked about that they're going to quote some small portion of a policy, right? Or maybe two small portions of a policy. And the part that might be in your favor that they're not pointing out to you could be, 50 pages before that in the definition section. And unfortunately, you're going to have to sit down with your cup of coffee and read all 70 pages if you want to hope to find something that's actually helpful to you. And it becomes incredibly important the moment your claim gets denied. This ties into some of the stuff that you were already talking about, but insurance policies are changing, right? We've already talked about some changes that we've seen in the water damage exclusion just in the recent years. And what do homeowners need to know about it so that they can prepare themselves to advocate for themselves if necessary?
Yeah. So what's changing is a lot of different things. And maybe beyond what we have time to talk about, but the main things that I'm seeing changing is the fundamental promise, right? And so what do I mean by that? Well, so pretty much insurance policies since like the 1960s have all begun with the same cadence, right? Whether it's commercial, whether it's homeowners, whether it's whatever, the insuring agreement in a special form coverage. So formerly known as the all risk
Yeah.
policies, right? They all start with we insure for direct physical loss of or damage to covered property. What I'm seeing is the perversion of the application of the promise and what the word direct means. Since 1967, I think was the call it the primary case law in this category about what does direct mean. Can direct mean indirect damages or other things that arise out of
Mm-hmm.
this thing? So I'll give you this example. So you have a bathroom that's all tile, right? And it's from 1980 and it's beautiful and it's pink tile, right? And they don't make this discontinued pink tile
Mm-hmm.
anymore. And there's a loss that happens, and this tile is now damaged. So, but only like 5 square feet of it is, and you got an entire bathroom floor to ceiling all pink
Mm-hmm.
tile. Well, you'll hear commonly insurance companies say, well, we don't owe to match, and we don't owe for this, and we don't owe for that. Well, what's the background? What's the backbone of the principle is to indemnify a policyholder against the financial loss they've incurred, right? And so before that tile became damaged from whatever your covered cause of loss is, insert covered cause of loss here. Whatever that fundamental thing was that brought about your loss, you now need to give them back what they had, which was an all pink bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you give them back an all pink bathroom when those materials aren't available anymore and they're outdated? Well, you give them current things. It's a replacement cost
Yeah.
policy, right? And so one of the things that I'm seeing the most of is this perversion of what the word direct means in a policy. Direct, like Justice Scalia on the Supreme Court was like very well known as being a textualist.
Yes. Yeah.
Meaning like you read the text and it means what it
Yep.
means and it doesn't mean anything more or less than what it says. Well, that's not the case in the world of insurance, but they want everyone to become a textualist. They want it all to be narrowly construed. They want it all to be looked at very closely. And that's where I see the next 5 to 10 years of insurance claims and case law and arguments kind of going, which is going to be this idea that direct means just the one tile that was suffered a claim, right? Or suffered the direct cause of loss. And it's not all this other stuff. You already see it in roof claims. You already see it in siding claims, and those types of arguments on the exterior of a home. And I think they're going to look to bring it to the interior businesses as well. What I don't think is going to happen is that you're going to see an insurance agreement change its wording from direct or indirect, right? Like I don't think they're going to expand that. But that's
It'll
what
be like a functional pre-loss condition or something like that.
Well, and quite honestly, the functional pre-loss is what a lot of carriers are
Yeah.
arguing now,
Yeah.
right? My analogy of that commonly use is, a car with a dent on the fender still drives down the road,
Mm-hmm.
but doesn't the insurance company still pay to fix the
Mm-hmm.
fender,
Mm-hmm.
right? They do. And, it's color matched and painted
Yep.
and repaired and, you get your car back. Why we're getting so far away from base principles in the context of a claim, I don't understand the move for it, other than it's just monetarily based.
This departure from the base principles, that principle of indemnification, right? Um, how do we get back to that? It's not even in the policy, right? And even in the state codes that you have, it's kind of not as clear cut as you would hope. Honestly, in my experience with insurance, the place where you see indemnification as a principle the most is just in the licensing training. And then at that point, and once you move away from that and it comes to the day to day of actually executing and doing things, there's very little documentation that's calling that to task. So how do we take what was once granted as foundational and bring it back in as what it was meant to be?
I think the challenge with that, Aaron, is that you would have to start to train adjusters properly. So when I came up in the insurance industry, so I've been doing this for about 20 years. When I started, the old guard was still in charge,
Mm-hmm.
right? And as I moved through my career at carriers, the new guard was coming in. What I see in the current trend of insurance companies and management is that they're managing transactions, they're not managing claims, right? So they see a transaction count, and it's about processing transactions to closure in a timely fashion, right? When you look at like the automated insurance companies, your Lemonades, your Hippos, the
Yeah.
AI driven ones, right? What are they most proud of? What are they boasting? Their time from report to payment, right?
It took two
And
seconds. What
closing,
was that article?
yeah, and closing the transaction, right? I was recently at a symposium in Arizona, talking about artificial intelligence and insurance. And one of them, it involved healthcare, so a bit askew from what we're talking about. But health insurance companies are using AI to deal with all of the medical transactions and approvals that come through
Yep.
their systems. And they're making claim determinations in less than 2 seconds, whether somebody's surgery, cancer treatment, whatever, is approved or denied, right? So when you think of all the keywords that have to be present in some type of a thing in order for AI to look at it and go approved, denied, right? So when you say, how do we get back? Well, a couple things. One is you got to train the model, whatever the model is, whether it's an
Yep.
automated process, whether it's humans doing the work, you have to train them appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would say is carriers are training their adjusters the way they want their adjusters to handle the claims. So if they have an interest in narrowing the interpretation and application of coverage, they're going to do that. What I see change, and I don't know how long this change will last, but what I see change is when a policyholder is able to advocate for either for themselves or they bring in an advocate for them, you tend to get a different response,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the inputs are a little bit different. They're a little bit more nuanced. There's an
Mm-hmm.
understanding of what the wording is and the interplay is. And you have somebody who's got the 20 years of experience behind their eyes looking across the video screen at somebody or the phone line or the email at somebody saying, you guys know that this isn't what this does. And then, all of a sudden that claim went from disputed to paid,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when you talk about, this concept of like settle for more, I think the settle for more part is knowing that when you walk into this conversation, it's bigger than yourself. It's bigger than your claim is, right? And the person on the other end, one of my favorite questions to ask is, what do I need to tell you so that you'll pay this? What are the circumstances that have to happen in
Mm-hmm.
order for this to be covered and for you to pay for the loss, the financial loss I'm incurring?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And the adjusters hopefully will play along and they'll say, well, if this was the case, if this was the case, if this was the
Yep.
case, right? all of a sudden, like, how is my case not those cases? And now you have something that you can have a further dialogue about. Because as an adjuster, when I was on the carrier side, even now as a public adjuster on the policyholder side, everybody you talk to has that one claim in their mind where they know, well, management did approve that one. Why did they approve that one? I'm going to go ask my manager about why that one got paid
Yep.
and like we're denying this one, right? Because the inconsistency. So if I had to say one thing insurance companies love is consistency,
Yeah.
right? Because like they're again dealing with a large transactional volume. So if you have inconsistencies, it creates a vulnerability for them. So they need to be consistent in the application of their promises. Well, if there are these anomalies that exist, you have to find out why these anomalies exist so that you can ultimately come back to figure out the consistency that existed there. And then that's how I think you create your trend. So beyond having the ability to train insurance company adjusters, a lot of it's going to be fought in the courtrooms, right? A lot of it is going to be looked at your NAIC levels, right? Your National Insurance Association and Insurance Commissioner levels, the ones that set some of the tone and the regulations.
Yep.
So yeah, so I think from a settle for more perspective, from a policyholder perspective, I think asking that question of, well, what would I need to say in order for you to cover this?
Is there anything else, David, that you feel like is useful to add now? The first question and the other ones since it have all been aimed around policyholders kind of preparing themselves, right? Whether it's with the policy itself, preparing for when a claim is filed, how are they making themselves more prepared to be self-advocates?
Documentation, right? So if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So what I would say is if anyone's ever been called into HR, right, or if they have a human resources background, they know this very well, which is when you have that conversation with the adjuster, you need to send the adjuster an email, and you need to make sure, like say, please reply to this email in writing. This is my understanding from our conversation. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And document in that email and hit send. Whether or not the adjuster replies or not isn't the thing. It's the fact that you're at least documenting what your understanding was of that conversation. And there's a time and a date stamp, and it's correlated back to a discussion that if they never take the opportunity to respond and correct any inaccuracies, that makes for a different kind of argument later if it comes to that. If they correct inaccuracies, oh, I never said that, right? Well, at least now you're getting to the forefront of what was actually communicated.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so if you're telling me you didn't say that, what did you say? How did I form this understanding otherwise? So I think that would be, if I wanted to build on the settle for more aspect of it, read your policy before your loss happens so that it's nice and broad. Um, when it comes time to make that first notice of loss, be aware of the questions they're asking aren't necessarily lending to themselves towards coverage. So only speak to the things you're comfortable speaking to or know. And I don't know is an honest answer, right? You don't need to know everything. And then lastly, it would be document, right? Take your photographs, you send your emails, recount conversations that happened, and build that file. One of the cheap and easy tools that exists, because you can get an email address for free from anywhere. One of the things I try to have my clients do right away is make an email address and either start communicating just from that on this claim or CC it on everything and ask your adjusters to CC it on everything so that you end up with a tight file in chronological order right where it needs to be. Because eventually, if you need to go to a second level of help, if you need to get a public adjuster involved, if you need to get a lawyer involved, you got to all of a sudden bring everything together and you got to find it, right? And I don't know if your email is anything like my email, but I imagine you just get thousands of them a day, and it just ends up being this wasteland of communication at this point, right?
Yeah.
So one of the, and it doesn't, you can put it right on the nose. Data loss at insert email. right? So you can just put it right on the tin. You don't have to make it clever or try to hide it. There's nothing nefarious about tracking vital communications with something so consequential.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. David, thank you so much. Always enjoy chatting with you. Always feel like we learned something. We will certainly be tapping into your knowledge more, and excited to get more specific into stuff. I know you call yourself a word nerd, so I think it'll be fun to bring specific problems to you at times, right? Or like, hey, here's an endorsement we haven't seen before. Let's chat with it. Or here's a problem that we've seen with a homeowner. Maybe even like a mock negotiation at one point.
Ooh.
See how
Oh, that'd be fun.
that'd be interesting.
That'd be interesting.
But yeah, really appreciate it. If someone was interested in reaching out to you for advocate claim services, give another recap of what specifically you guys do and how someone might find you.
Yeah, so Advocate Claim Service, we cater to high net worth individuals or prominent individuals and corporations. We specialize in seven-figure losses and higher all across the country. So that's tends to be our sweet spot, where a lot of our expertise and teams really seem to lend themselves towards creating optimum outcomes.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again, David. We'll talk soon, and appreciate all your time.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thanks again for joining us for the Tugboat Settle for More show. My name's Cameron.
And I'm Aaron.
We're the co-founders of Tugboat, the online claim support service that helps you get everything that you're owed from your insurance claim.
Thank you again for David Princeton coming on. And if you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, follow along, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.